A doctor saving a stranger's life, but in seconds, he became a suspect. Handcuffed, humiliated, broadcast to millions. This wasn't a mistake, it was a mirror. And what America saw, it could no longer ignore. Before we begin the story, I'd love to know where you're sharing it from and what time it is. Feel free to leave a comment. It was a cold, wet night when Dr. Malcolm Reeves finished his last shift at St. Vincent Medical Center, the hospital where he had dedicated 12 years of his life. The clock read 2:17 a.m. The parking lot was nearly empty. Malcolm walked slowly, exhausted but alert. After years in emergency medicine, he knew nothing was more dangerous than rushing. Near the sidewalk leading to the parking structure, he noticed a man lying motionless on the pavement, homeless by the look of his tattered clothes soaked from the rain. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He crouched down and checked the man's pulse. It was faint. There was a small wound on the man's head, likely from falling. As Malcolm pulled out his phone to call for an ambulance, headlights flashed directly toward him. A sharp siren followed, slicing through the quiet night. A police cruiser skidded to a stop. Two officers jumped out, hands hovering near their holsters. They saw Malcolm, a black man, kneeling beside an unconscious body. They didn't ask questions. They didn't check credentials. They didn't consider that this was a doctor helping a patient. They moved fast, boots splashing in the puddles. Malcolm started to speak, to explain, but fear, deep generational fear, had already spoken louder in the minds of the officers. "Stand up, hands behind your back." Before he could fully process what was happening, Malcolm's wrists were forced behind him. The cold steel of the handcuffs locked tight around his skin. In that moment, he wasn't Dr. Malcolm Reeves, respected physician. He was not the man who had saved hundreds of lives. He was simply a suspect, a possible threat. Blood trickled from his mouth where his face had hit the wet concrete. Rain mixed with blood. His white coat, still damp from his shift, was now stained red and brown. A bystander across the lot held up a phone. The recording lasted only 90 seconds, but by the next morning that video would ignite an entire country. Malcolm did not resist. His mind raced. His mother, his daughter asleep at home, the oath he had taken when he first put on his white coat, first do no harm. But that night the harm wasn't caused by him. It was caused by fear, by bias, by a silence that had lasted too long. Long before he was Dr. Malcolm Reeves, he was just Malcolm, a boy growing up on the south side of Chicago. His neighborhood was a place of contradictions. On some streets, kids played basketball late into the night. On others, gunshots were more common than laughter. For Malcolm, it was a world where survival was an everyday achievement. His mother, Yvonne Reeves, worked as a nurse at a small clinic. She often came home late, exhausted, her uniform stained with blood or tears. But every night, without fail, she would kneel by Malcolm's bed and whisper, "You can change the world, baby, but you have to survive it first." Malcolm's father had once dreamed of becoming a lawyer. That dream ended the night he was pulled over for a broken taillight and never made it back home. Arrested on false charges, he spent years behind bars before the case was quietly dismissed. By the time he returned, the damage had already been done to his career, his marriage, and his spirit. At 9 years old, Malcolm learned a brutal truth. Justice didn't look the same for everyone. School was Malcolm's refuge. He devoured books like they were lifeboats, clinging to stories of scientists, explorers, and healers. His favorite was Ben Carson's autobiography. He read it so often the cover wore thin and the pages curled at the edges. But even in the classroom, Malcolm could not escape judgment. In 7th grade, a guidance counselor pulled him aside and spoke softly, almost kindly. "You're smart, Malcolm. But medicine? That's a high mountain to climb. Maybe think about something more realistic." Realistic. That word haunted him. By high school, Malcolm had made a decision. No one would define realistic for him. He earned top grades, aced his SATs, and applied to medical schools that people from his neighborhood rarely dared to dream about. When he was accepted into Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, his mother cried tears so heavy they soaked through the acceptance letter. But medical school wasn't a refuge. It was another battlefield. During his first anatomy lab, a professor glanced at Malcolm and muttered, "Medicine's not usually the path for young men like you." It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Malcolm swallowed every slight, every doubting glance, every Subtle reminder that some people only saw his skin before his skills. He didn't push back. He pushed forward. Years passed, degrees were earned, internships completed, lives saved. But Malcolm knew, no matter how high he climbed, there would always be those who refused to see past his color. And yet, he kept going, because his mother had told him to survive, and because he had made his own promise. One day, he would be the one whispering hope into someone else's ear. By the time he was 35, Dr. Malcolm Reeves had become one of the most respected emergency physicians at St. Vincent Medical Center. His colleagues described him as calm under pressure, brilliant in diagnosis, and relentless when it came to saving lives. But respect did not always mean acceptance. Malcolm's days were filled with triumphs and small humiliations alike. He was the doctor who reset broken bones, stopped heart attacks in their tracks, and sutured wounds with steady, tireless hands. Parents thanked him for saving their children. Spouses wept with relief at his bedside manner. Nurses sought his advice in the worst crises. Yet almost daily, Malcolm encountered the same question from patients, sometimes whispered, sometimes bold. "Are you really the doctor?" He could have worn a sign around his neck that read, "Yes, I'm the doctor," and it wouldn't have stopped the glances, the skepticism, the small moments that stung deeper than any open wound. Security guards occasionally stopped him at staff-only entrances. New staff members mistook him for a janitor, an orderly, or sometimes, ironically, a security guard himself. It was never overt. No one shouted slurs. No one told him he didn't belong, at least not with words. But the message came through in 1,000 silent ways. His skin spoke louder than his credentials. Even among colleagues, he noticed the pattern. Mistakes made by others were called errors. Mistakes he made, and there were few, became identifiable incidents. When a white doctor lost a patient, it was an unfortunate outcome. When Malcolm lost one, it was reviewed by the board. But he stayed, not because he enjoyed the fight, but because the fight was necessary. Every young patient who looked like him needed to see that a black man could be the one saving lives, not just the one needing to be saved. There were allies. Claire Rodriguez, a senior nurse, often shielded him from the worst of the politics. She had grown up Latina in a similar neighborhood and understood the silent codes of prejudice. She once told Malcolm, "You don't just heal people, Doc. You heal this place by existing in it." Still, Malcolm's resilience came at a cost. He carried the weight of 2 jobs, saving lives and convincing the world he had the right to do so. At home, his daughter Mia reminded him why it mattered. She was 7 years old, bright and curious. She loved hearing stories about the patients he had saved, though he carefully softened the details for her young ears. "Daddy," she once asked, "do doctors ever get scared?" "All the time," Malcolm replied, "but the best ones do it anyway." What he didn't tell her was this. Doctors like him didn't fear blood or failure. They feared being mistaken for something they were not. And soon that fear would no longer be theoretical. It would become a pair of handcuffs. It would become a headline. It would become a viral video. But not yet. For now, Malcolm kept doing what he had always done. He healed. He persevered. And he hoped, quietly, desperately, that it would be enough. It was a Wednesday night, or more accurately, Thursday morning. Malcolm had just completed a grueling 12-hour shift at St. Vincent. The ER had overflowed with the usual emergencies, car accidents, chest pains, allergic reactions, and one case that had rattled even his seasoned nerves. A young black teenager shot twice in the abdomen during a robbery gone wrong. Malcolm had saved him. Barely. As the boy was wheeled into post-op, Malcolm overheard a paramedic murmur, "Lucky the doc on call was him." A rare compliment. One he had earned the hard way. It was 2:17 a.m. when Malcolm finally left the building. He still wore his white coat, though he had meant to hang it up before heading out. It didn't matter. He was too tired to care. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, soft enough that he didn't pull up his hood as he crossed the slick pavement toward his car. That's when he saw the man. Slumped near the curb by the hospital's side lot was someone who didn't belong there. A homeless man, thin and trembling, soaked through by the night's earlier downpour. Even from a distance, Malcolm could tell something was wrong. The man wasn't moving. Malcolm's exhaustion vanished. His instincts took over. He knelt beside the man, quickly checking for a pulse. Weak, barely there. The man's head was bleeding from a small laceration, probably from falling against the concrete. "Sir," Malcolm said softly, though the man was unconscious. He needed an ambulance. Fast. Malcolm reached into his coat for his phone, but before he could dial, headlights flooded the scene. A police cruiser swung into the lot, tires splashing water into the air. Two officers emerged quickly, hands already near their weapons. Their expressions were taut, suspicious. One of them was Officer Joe Kessler, a man Malcolm recognized vaguely. Kessler had been stationed around the hospital before, always watchful, always serious. In that moment, Malcolm became acutely aware of what they were seeing. A black man kneeling over another man who was injured and unconscious. No stethoscope, no name badge, no visible ID, just a rain-soaked white coat and a cell phone in hand. Malcolm stood slowly, keeping his palms open and visible. "I'm Dr. Malcolm Reeves," he began. "This man needs med—" "Step back," Kessler barked. Malcolm complied instantly, stepping away from the homeless man. He collapsed. "I was checking his pulse. I work inside. Hands behind your back." The command came sharp and fast, no hesitation. "I'm a doctor," Malcolm repeated, his voice steady but urgent. "I work at St. Vincent. Check my ID." The officers moved in. Malcolm didn't resist. He could feel the cold steel of the handcuffs clamped down on his wrists, tighter than necessary. He felt the sting of the pavement as they forced him to his knees. His right cheek struck the wet ground. Rainwater mixed with blood from his split lip. A small crowd gathered near the hospital entrance. Some nurses, a security guard, and a few bystanders. Most watched in stunned silence. One young nurse, Emily Hayes, stood frozen. She knew Malcolm. She had assisted him in surgeries. But now, fear and confusion paralyzed her. No one intervened. Someone raised a phone and began recording. The entire encounter, from the police cruiser's arrival to the moment Malcolm was pressed into the pavement, lasted just over 90 seconds. But 90 seconds can rewrite a man's entire life. Malcolm remained silent as the officers lifted him to his feet. The homeless man, still unconscious, was now being attended to by paramedics who had finally been called. Through the rain, Malcolm searched the small crowd. He caught Emily's gaze. She looked away. His thoughts didn't race. They narrowed. His daughter, his mother, the young man he had saved earlier that night. First, do no harm. But that oath had not protected him, and the harm was already done. By sunrise, Malcolm's name was already trending. The bystanders' video had hit social media before the police report was even filed. 90 seconds of shaky footage, recorded from a cheap smartphone, captured everything. A black man kneeling beside an unconscious person, confronted by police, cuffed and pinned to the wet ground. There was no sound in the clip, no context, but none was needed. The image alone struck a nerve. Our doctor in cuffs, our justice for Malcolm. This is why we kneel. Hashtags flooded the digital landscape. News anchors replayed the video on a loop. Pundits debated what they called yet another instance of racial profiling in America's institutions. Commentators on both sides of the political divide weighed in. Some blamed overzealous policing. Others blamed Malcolm for not complying quickly enough, as if obedience could erase suspicion. Within hours, journalists descended on St. Vincent Medical Center. The hospital's official statement was swift and sterile. "We are aware of an incident involving one of our physicians. We are fully cooperating with authorities and will provide updates as appropriate." No defense, no support, no mention of Malcolm's years of service. The silence from his own institution was louder than any accusation. Inside the hospital, his colleagues were divided. Nurses like Claire Rodriguez, who had worked beside Malcolm for years, were furious. She spoke out online defending him, recounting the lives he'd saved and the families he had comforted. Others remained cautiously quiet, fearing professional backlash. The hospital's security team went into damage control. Guards were instructed not to discuss the incident. Malcolm's badge was quietly deactivated pending an internal review. But the public had already formed its verdict. Civil rights attorneys volunteered to represent Malcolm pro bono. Activists organized peaceful protests outside St. Vincent. A mural of Malcolm's face appeared overnight on a nearby wall, a symbol of resilience and injustice, painted in bold colors against the gray concrete. And yet, Malcolm himself remained unseen. He stayed home, suspended from his duties, his medical license temporarily frozen pending investigation. He watched the coverage unfold from his living room. His daughter Mia sat beside him, too young to fully grasp the storm surrounding her father. "Daddy, why are people showing your picture on TV?" she asked. Malcolm didn't answer at first. He knew any explanation would break a part of her innocence he desperately wanted to protect. Finally, he said quietly, "Because sometimes, even when you do the right thing, people don't see it right away." But the truth was harsher. Sometimes people refused to see. The investigation moved quickly, at least by official standards. But for Malcolm, every day felt like a year. His attorney, a sharp, relentless woman named Vanessa Grant, took control of the narrative from the moment she stepped into the public eye. She wasn't just defending Malcolm in court. She was defending him in the court of public opinion, a battlefield just as brutal. "They will try to make you the aggressor," Vanessa warned. "We won't let them." But the system had its own momentum. The police department released a carefully worded statement. Officers responded appropriately to what they perceived as a threat. The hospital doubled down on neutrality, citing an ongoing internal review and refusing further comment. Malcolm's life was dissected on television and across social media. Supporters pointed to his spotless record, his service, his character. Critics dredged up everything from his parking tickets to out-of-context comments he had made years ago during a community health panel. No one seemed interested in the simple fact that he had been saving a man's life. That detail was drowned beneath louder narratives. The community itself was split. Local activists rallied behind Malcolm, organizing marches and forums. Clergy members spoke his name from pulpits. Medical students wore black armbands in solidarity. But others, including some hospital donors and conservative pundits, questioned why race had to be a factor at all. "This isn't about race," they insisted. "It's about following orders." The phrase "following orders" echoed in Malcolm's mind. He had followed orders his entire life, followed rules, followed protocol, and yet here he was. Emily Hayes, the young nurse who had witnessed the arrest, became a reluctant figure in the unfolding drama. At first, she remained silent. Fear gripped her, fear of professional backlash, of becoming a target herself. But as the protest grew and the media storm intensified, guilt weighed heavier than fear. 3 weeks after the incident, Emily contacted Vanessa. She was ready to testify. "I saw him trying to help," she told the legal team. "He wasn't a threat. He was doing what any doctor would do." Her statement was a crack in the wall of silence, a small but critical shift. Meanwhile, Malcolm found himself both at the center and at the edges of his own story. Every time he turned on the TV, he saw his name, his face, but no one seemed interested in who he really was. He wasn't a martyr. He wasn't a headline. He was a father, a healer, a man who had done everything right, only to find himself vilified for it. "I never wanted to be a symbol," he confessed to Vanessa one evening. "I just wanted to help people." Vanessa nodded solemnly. "Sometimes you don't get to choose." The court date loomed. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered. Protest signs waved. Some read "Justice for Malcolm." Others simply bore the words, "Let doctors heal." The outcome would not just decide Malcolm's fate. It would send a message to every doctor, every patient, every person who had ever wondered if doing the right thing was enough. The stakes were no longer personal. They were national, and Malcolm was ready. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back wall, cameras resting in their laps. Activists filled the pews. Hospital staff sat in tense clusters, some avoiding Malcolm's gaze, others nodding to offer silent support. Malcolm stood before the judge, flanked by Vanessa and her legal team. He wore a simple suit, no white coat, no badge. Just a man stripped down to the essence of who he was and who the world chose to see. The prosecution opened with precision. The police had responded to a perceived threat, they argued. The officers acted within department guidelines. Race had nothing to do with it. "This is about safety," the prosecutor repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it true. Vanessa countered calmly, methodically. She presented Malcolm's spotless record. She showed images of patients he had saved, letters from families he had comforted, awards he had earned but never displayed. Then came the moment that changed everything. The hospital had resisted releasing its security footage, citing privacy concerns, but a subpoena forced their hand. The judge approved the video's admission into evidence. The footage played silently across 3 courtroom monitors. It showed Malcolm kneeling beside the homeless man, checking his pulse, reaching for his phone. The police cruiser arrived. Officers emerged. Commands were given. Compliance followed. No resistance, no aggression, just a doctor trying to help. But that wasn't the twist. As the officers moved in to restrain Malcolm, a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. Nurse Emily Hayes. She stood frozen for a moment before stepping forward. Her hand lifted as if to intervene, but then she stepped back, disappearing into the shadows of the hospital entrance. The defense paused the video. Vanessa turned to the courtroom. "Nurse Hayes, would you please come forward?" Emily approached the stand, her face pale but resolute. She described the night in clear, unwavering terms. Malcolm had been trying to help. He had followed every instruction. He had been treated like a threat before anyone even asked his name. Then came the question Vanessa had prepared her for. "Nurse Hayes, why didn't you speak up that night?" Emily swallowed hard. "Because I was scared." "Of what?" Emily hesitated, eyes glistening. "Of becoming my father." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Vanessa leaned in. "Explain." "My father was a police officer," Emily said. "He used to tell me not to get involved, that speaking up only made things worse. I didn't want to believe he was right, but in that moment, I froze." She paused, voice steadying. "My father arrested an innocent man once, years ago, a man who later became Dr. Malcolm Reeves' father." The room went silent. Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. "I can't stay silent anymore," Emily finished. "That cycle has to end." It wasn't just testimony, it was a confession, a reckoning, a bridge between past injustice and present accountability. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. Their verdict, not guilty of any wrongdoing. Malcolm was exonerated, his medical license reinstated. The police department issued a formal apology. The hospital, under mounting public pressure, not only welcomed Malcolm back, but launched a mandatory bias training program for all staff. But those outcomes, while meaningful, were not the true payoff. The true payoff was the moment Malcolm walked out of the courthouse, hand in hand with his daughter. She looked up at him and asked, "Does this mean people believe you now?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. He looked at the crowd. Dale, a sea of faces of every race, every background, some cheering, some silent, all watching. "Some do," he finally said. "And for the ones who don't, we'll just keep showing them." In the weeks that followed the trial, Malcolm returned to St. Vincent Medical Center. He resumed his shifts in the ER. Patients came and went, emergencies rose and fell, but the undercurrent of change was undeniable. Some colleagues now met his eyes with renewed respect, others with lingering discomfort. Prejudice, Malcolm knew, did not vanish with a verdict, but accountability had begun. A crack had formed in the wall. He spoke at community forums, universities, and medical schools, not because he sought the spotlight, but because silence had once nearly broken him. He owed it to his daughter, to his father, to the homeless man he had tried to save. "We talk about the Hippocratic Oath," Malcolm told a packed auditorium at a medical conference, "do no harm." But harm isn't just physical. It's what happens when we stay silent in the face of injustice. It's what happens when we let fear dictate who we help and who we ignore. The room was quiet, hanging on his every word. "I didn't choose to become a symbol. I chose to become a healer. But when you're Black in America, even when you save lives, you have to be both." Outside the hospital, murals of Malcolm's face still decorated walls. Some called him a hero, others an activist, but he rejected both titles. "I'm a doctor," he reminded people. "That's all." But those who knew the truth understood he had become something more. Not because he wanted to, because history demanded it. His daughter, now older, often accompanied him to community events. She no longer asked why people showed his picture on television. She understood now. "Daddy," she once said, "you told me that sometimes people don't see the good right away." Do you think they see it now? Malcolm smiled gently. Some do, he said. And for the ones who still don't, we'll just keep showing them. Because justice is not a destination, it's a practice. And the work was far from over.